Beautiful, beautiful. We want to forward to O'Cree, a fellow or Consul Maher in Boston, Laiose Moore. Agus an Fern Galair, a toy Maston Carune. Agus fortune for Letter Live Galair, or Gorgia, Agus or Drina. I'd like to welcome you all, and in particular our Consul General Boston, Laiose Moore, who's come out to visit and also was the person who selected this year's competition finalists. So could we have a round of applause? Thank you. In you, Kelluramit, Margaret Maher, Jory, Colleen Imshire, Avia Governor John Amherst, Le Winter, Emily Dickinson. Today we commemorate the Margaret Maher Award, named after the Irish immigrant from County Tipperary, who spent 30 years working with Emily Dickinson, the poet, and her family here in Amherst. In fact, some people surmise, some scholars, that she had a huge influence on some of the phrases that Dickinson used in her poems, like himself and so forth. That's not my territory, so I leave it. But I would suggest that you check out our website, because Anna Mundo, who's a Dublin woman, did a beautiful piece, a presentation for us. What year was it? A couple of programs ago, and we made a podcast of it. So it's on the website if you'd like to listen to it. And Anna is from Dublin, and a journalist, a trained journalist, and just did a beautiful presentation. So if you want to know more about Margaret Maher and the Irish servants and their importance to the Dickinson family, have a listen to Anna. Okay, our competition was open to all members of the community. We are particularly pleased that last year's winner, Ken Johnson, came back to present on his trip to Ireland, because the first prize is a round trip to Ireland. And I'd like to acknowledge Ken here and thank him for making the journey to be with us today. And the idea of the Margaret Maher Award was to turn around the association in Amherst in terms of what was already there. We had an unfortunate incident, Laiose made on a new word in Boston at the time, 2014, there were drunken student riots around St. Patrick's Day. It made the news in Ireland, it made the news here. So we said there's a Sam who is missing today, unfortunately, he's ill. As he quite rightly said, students have to learn how to do these things. They have to learn how to drink, and he has children and boys and all the rest of it. And he said, fine, we'll never change that behaviour, but what we can do is do something positive. So that's what we're doing, and I'd like to hand over now to Annie to acknowledge all the support we get in order to make Irish a special place in the community in Amherst.
Usually it's Sam Hannigan who does the honors, but he's sick today. I'm Annie, I'm the tea lady. I'm usually back in the kitchen wandering around the scones. But I did want to acknowledge on Sam's behalf and even behalf on all of our behalf. First of all of you, community members, presenters, members, volunteers, musicians, dancers. Many of our musicians are at a music festival in Catskills, a big festival, and are missing today, but they're here week after week, month after month. They're really fabulous group. Also to acknowledge Ireland's Department of Foreign Affairs and the Immigrant Support Program, and Ireland's Consul General from Boston, Laiose Moore, and the team in Boston. Thank you very much. And to acknowledge and to introduce Ken Johnson, who's going to talk about the Walk to Freedom, Belfast to Derry. Just to give you a little sense, we have a packed program today. We have Ken, about a 20-minute presentation, and then time for a discussion with Ken. And then from 2:40, perhaps a bit later than that, to 3:10ish, 3:15, we'll have the three finalists for the Margaret Maher Award reading their essays. And then we will have the announcement of the winner and the runners-up by Tim Goodhind. And then we will break into tea and tunes. And this time, we're extremely fortunate to have not only musicians who are standing in for our missing musicians, but also to have Irish dancers with us today for the Tea and Tunes part of the program.
UMass Irish.
UMass Irish. Thank you very much. So welcome, and Ken, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Ken Johnston. How's everyone today? I'm very delighted to be here and delighted to be invited back to talk about my interest in Ireland and how being a recipient of the Margaret Maher Award helped me to realize and deepen my interest in Ireland. I'm a hiker, and I enjoy walking long distances. My most recent walk was a 200-mile pilgrimage across Puerto Rico last month. And this opportunity came to me about 2 weeks after I returned from Ireland. It actually came from my brother, who has been doing some cultural exchange work on Long Island in Puerto Rico, and had this idea of walking across the island to commemorate the second anniversary of the passing of Hurricane Maria. And we were joined on that walk by our mother, and so we were doing it for families to help bring families back together that were separated by that storm. I wasn't planning a second long walk this year, but it was.
You have a mic if you'd like to use it.
Okay.
It's just that area, I see it. Right now.
Okay, what's that? Is that
You better go straight to me.
Okay.
Please.
I wasn't planning a second long walk this year, but the opportunity to commemorate that moment that devastated the island, I couldn't pass up. So when I decided to undertake that walk, I began investigating, well, what connections existed between Ireland and Puerto Rico. So I want to begin my talk today with a little trivia question. Can anyone name the leading figure in the Puerto Rican independence movement who helped establish several Irish independence centers in Boston around 1919 and was hired to help draft the Constitution of the Irish Free State?
Take a guess. Edmund DeVello?
Not quite, but he was involved. Well, let me reveal the answer. The answer is Pedro Albizu Campos. While attending Harvard Law School between 1919 and 1921, Mr. Campos helped with establishing Irish independence centers in the Boston area. As a result of his work, he was introduced to the Irish leader and then and he recruited him to assist with drafting the Constitution of the Free State of Ireland, as we know, or the Republic of Ireland today. So I try to make connections with all the walks, and that was one of those important connections that I discovered. I just thought that was really interesting, and I wanted to share with everyone. So in the spring of 2018, I walked from Selma, Alabama to Memphis, Tennessee to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King as part of the National Civil Rights ceremony in his honor. The first leg of my 400-mile journey involved walking the historic 54-mile Selma to Montgomery voting rights trail that is now designated as a U.S. National Historic Trail. And as I shared this part of the story last year, I remember people in the audience here looking at me like wondering, what does this have to do with Ireland? He's talking about walking across Alabama. And so I went on to explain in my essay that towards the end of my walk across the Deep South, people asked me if I had thought about what my next walk would be. I said, yes, I want to walk across Ireland. And they would look at me quizzically and say, why Ireland? And I explained I wanted to walk across Ireland because of the profound effect the U.S. Civil Rights Movement had on the people in Northern Ireland who also felt disenfranchised by segregation imposed on Irish Catholics and Protestants. So in my essay, I talked about wanting to symbolically connect the 1965 Selma to Montgomery Civil Rights March to the 1969 Belfast to Derry Civil Rights March. This year was the 50th anniversary of the historic People's Democracy March from Belfast to Derry. The 1969 march was organized by students from Queen's University Belfast who were involved in the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association. It was a 75-mile long walk that was modeled on the Montgomery March. In both marches, intimidation and violence were common practices used by opponents to disrupt the civil rights marches. And so from there, I'm going to start showing you some of my slides. So this was the walk that I took this past spring. I began on April 10th, which was the anniversary of the 1998 Good Friday Agreement. And the actual march occurred in January of 1969. Wasn't going to Ireland in January. Waiting for spring. So this was the 75-mile trail starting in Belfast. It went through Antrim and Randallstown and a host of other towns that I'll talk about as I go along. I was joined in this walk by a gentleman I met in Selma. His name is Daniel Shipp. He's from Salt Lake City, Utah. And I was able to convince him to come join me on this walk. And we didn't know it at the time, but once we got going, we discovered that since 1969, there have been some ceremonial walks at different intervals, a 10-year interval, a 20-year interval, to remember the Belfast to Derry March. But we discovered we were the first since 1969 to actually walk the complete trail. And this is us standing in front of the Belfast City Hall. We tried to remain close to the original trail as possible. There were some parts of it we couldn't determine, but it's pretty much a straight shot from Belfast to Antrim to Randallstown and onwards. So we were able to connect by just following the current roads. To help promote my walk, I sent out some press releases, I did fundraising. This was an article from Irish Central, and I was really delighted with this article because the writer really got it. He understood what my walk was about. So I'm really proud to story. Some of the things that I did before I started that walk, Ede suggested, well, you must learn about, Frederick Douglass. And I was like, Frederick Douglass? He said, yes, because he did a 6-month tour, speaking engagement back in the 1840s, 1847 to be exact, on temperance and civil rights. And so as part of my preparation, I read books about Frederick Douglass, I took Irish language classes at Elms College with Chip, and just did a whole lot of reading to prepare myself and to learn about some of the history that I was stepping through. And on one of those occasions, in preparing for myself, I went and visited the Western Mass Irish Center in West Springfield. And at the time, there was this folk singer that was there, and he, talked about, there's a room full of people, and you've probably been there, it's very loud, and people are drinking, and while he was singing. And he talked about this historical figure in Ireland's history named Roddy McClory. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I thought it was a very touching song. And then along my walk, I come through this town called Tuam. And we were invited by some of the locals to stay at a cottage house there in Tuam. And we actually stayed back at the cottage house in our tents, and we tented along the way. And the woman who ran the cottage says, oh, you gotta go see the memorial for Roddy McClory. Roddy McClory, that name sounds familiar. And then it dawned on me, oh, this was the person in the song that I heard. And so we walked up the road, and there was this statue that was dedicated to Roddy McClory, who was hanged there as part of his protest of British imperialism. And they had this memorial that was dedicated to him, and it was from the Tuam Bridge that he was hanged. And I was like, wow, this is really fascinating. Well, along the walk, I learned in 1969, this is one of those towns that the civil rights marches passed through. And the day before they arrived, opponents of the civil rights march blew up this memorial. And it took about 10 years for the community there to rebuild this memorial to them. What you're seeing here in this picture is the English side of the memorial. The other side, the more decorated side, is all in Gaelic. And so I wanted to make sure I shared that with you. And just learned so much. People were just so open and friendly in this town. We were really delighted to learn more of the history, because it was a one-light traffic town. I was like, oh, there's nothing here. We arrived late in the day, we retired. We got delayed by traffic on the A6 where there was construction going on, and we had a choice of either taking a 12-mile detour from Randallstown or we could follow the A6, and we decided to take the shortcut and follow the A6, and we literally had traffic at our shoulders for about 6 miles all the way along the A6. That bumper-to-bumper traffic traveling to Belfast, buses, trucks, it was a nightmare. But we made it. And so this was, for me, was one of the more memorable towns. I really was delighted in just learning about the history of this town and meeting the people there. And from there, we walked on to, pardon my Irish, Malachi. It was the next town over. And that was also an amazing town because it was the home of Seamus Heaney, and a famous Irish literary artist. And there we met some people in the pub who said, well, you have to stop at this next town over. There were some wonderful people there. The people there will be able to tell you more about the civil rights marches from 1969. And this gentleman introduced us to, he contacted his mother, who was now 70-something years old, but was able to participate in the 1969 Civil Rights March. And at the time during this march, there were a lot of detours. The police kept detouring the original civil rights marches to throw them off. There was a lot of intimidation during that Civil Rights March. The marchers, each night, every time they would lay down somewhere to rest at a different hall or place, there were bomb threats made. Police would come charging into their encampment and clear everyone out because of the bomb threats. So they were really sleep deprived that whole time during those 4 days of their original march. And they experienced a lot of harassment, much more harassment than the civil rights marchers who marched from Selma to Montgomery, who were accompanied by federal troops throughout the way. And here in Northern Ireland, they had no federal troops to accompany them. There was a group of students and their followers. And one of the things that I learned during the trip was the original march started in Belfast. There was about 40 people. And as the march entered some of these different nationalist areas, and you have to remember, a lot of Northern Ireland is a unionist area, so they passed through a lot of unionist towns. They were not allowed to walk through Antrim. They were not allowed to walk through Randallstown. We were able to do that for them today, this year. And but Tuam was one of those traditional nationalist communities where once they arrived, they found a lot of support and love for them. Tuam was pretty special. So we met this gentleman who introduced us to his mother, and we arrived in Mahara, Megara. The very next day, we arrived late in the day, and this is Brackawally Hall, and this is where the marchers stayed on the third day of their walk. And this gentleman that we met in the previous town, who contacted his mother, they contacted some of the local farmers. We got there late in the afternoon, about 6, 7 o'clock, and we had dinner, and by the time we got settled around and reached this final point, it was like around 9 o'clock at night. We'd been walking some during the night. Well, all these farmers came out and meted us at this hall, and they opened the hall up and they allowed us to stay there that night. It was so wonderful that we got to stay in this hall that the original marchers stayed 50 years ago. When they arrived at this point in January 1969, there were about 200 of them at that point. And so the march had significantly swelled. And so it was remodeled over the years. It's still widely used by the community. And so we got to take a lot of pictures inside and meet some of the farmers who lived locally, whose parents either had passed at this point but were involved in the Civil Rights March at that time. And so they were sharing stories. They were children. Sorry, I didn't expect I was going to be emotional like this. It was touching. It was very touching. And one of the farmers that we met that evening came up and he introduced himself and he says, I live nearby. He says, bring you over to my house tomorrow morning for breakfast. He said, I have 5 goats, 1 dog, and 100,000 chickens. And this was late at night, and I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. And so the next morning, Mr. Bryson came and picked me up, and he brought me to his house. And as we were driving up to his house, there were the 5 goats in the front yard. There were 5 sheep in the front yard. Sheep's goats. There were sheep. 5 sheep in the front yard. And there was 1 dog running around. And there were these large buildings, and that's where they had 100,000 chickens. And it turns out they are the largest poultry producer in all of Northern Ireland, Glenshane Eggs. And that's what their family does. And this is the Bryson family. And we had eggs and ham and toast for breakfast, additional breakfast there. And they were just very, very lovely. They welcomed us with open eyes. It's traditional. Catholic family is very large. They had like 8 or 9 kids, 4 girls, 5 boys, and they're all doing very well. And we just had a wonderful meeting, and the kids shared their life. They all are involved in hurling, and it's these big wooden hurling sticks that the girls used to play, and they were very good at it. And it was just really wonderful to meet this family. And one of the things that the kids told us was that segregation is still very alive in Northern Ireland. They go to Catholic schools, and Protestant kids go to the public schools there. There's not much mixing. There's no mixing of team sports. It's still pretty much very segregated there. And they live in Maher, and on the outskirts of it. And this is where we started to feel some tension during the walk. Up until that point, it's pretty easygoing. Everyone was very kind to us. We were really embraced by the nationalist community throughout our walk. The unionist community kept us kind of at arm's length. And we even had someone tell us they weren't interested in our civil rights walk. And we were like, okay, that's fine. And it was when we entered this town, we got yelled at for the first time to go home, go back where you came from. And we treated that like a welcome. It's like, okay, this is our first time getting this kind of message along the route. And so we just continued our walk, and we met other people there that were very nice, and so that was just kind of a blip in the radar. But that's when we started feeling tensions. And as we got further along during the walk, there were some other things that we began to feel. We arrived in another town, Cloggy, and which was the scene of a bombing back in the 70s, a major bombing. And we just happened to stroll into this hotel bar, and we had some drinks there, and someone comes up and says, well, this is where they planned the Burntolet Bridge incident. I was like, ooh, okay. I was like, no, I did not know that. And it just became really very negative during that time when we were in this place, and we were just looking for some place where we could put our tents down at night, and we decided that just because of the feeling that we were getting from some of the patrons in that bar, we decided just to leave that town that night. We decided to hit the road and just continue walking for about another 40 minutes or so at night. Just because there were some really bad vibes in that town. And that's when we started just really seeing some differences in just the landscape and communities. We would drive in some of these towns, and there would be these red and white flags up on the poles. They were Union Jack flags. And as an American, I never thought the Union Jack flag could be intimidating, but here, in some of these communities that we're passing through, it was a clear marker. It's sort of like the Confederate flag. You see, it's a clear marker about whose community this was. And then when you get on the other side of the town, it would be, all of a sudden you would see lots of signs for Sinn Féin, and they would tell you about who lives on that side of the town. And, or you would see curbstones, and it would be painted red, white, blue, and that also told you. So there were some real clear signs as we got closer to Derry that there was a divide still existing. This is the famous Burntolet Bridge. I'm not sure if you've heard, or excuse me, Burntolet Bridge. This was where the civil rights marches in 1969 were attacked by groups of B specials and other antagonists and people who were opposed to civil rights changes in Northern Ireland. If you search online, there's a lot of videos that shows the attack. It was a well-publicized event. And we came across this bridge, and we knew it was there. It was part of our walk, and we made some extra time to spend there. Took a lot of pictures while we were there, just to feel the moment. I did meet a woman who was 12 years old that was there that day when the marchers were attacked. Her mother allowed her to skip school because her sister, who was 18 at the time, was going to be going with her boyfriend, and so her mother thought that they would be safe. Little did they know that there was a planned attack that was had been developed there, where some rocks were from local quarry were pre-positioned on the hillsides, and so as the marchers walked to this bridge, it was like a V-shaped corridor along the roadway, and some of the antagonists began stoning them during that period. And as the marchers tried to flee to some of the adjacent fields, police would beat them back onto the roadways. A lot of people got hurt. This woman remembers jumping into a river that runs underneath there, and someone saved her and took her to the local hospital. So that was the only person I met who would actually experience that. And she was a very lovely lady. I can't remember, I think it was Dungiven that we met, these two ladies. We were just coming from dinner, and they pulled up in their car and they said, "Where are you two going? Where are you from?" And with their thick Irish accent, it was just really cute. They're like, we were telling them what we were doing. They're like, "Oh, you gotta come over and meet our husbands." And they dragged us over to their house and had some beers together, and they told us these stories. It was just an evening of incredible laughter. You just can't imagine. It was just so funny. It was really great. This next slide is the Burntallet Bridge being tunneled for construction on the A6. We learned about this while we were there that day from a construction worker that they were planning to destroy the bridge. And it's really hard when I heard that. I was like, you're destroying your Edmund Pettus Bridge. This is so much part of an important part of your history. But the development of the A6 and the relief of traffic along there was really important to our community as well. So this was a picture from the Derry Journal taken in August, and there you can see the Burntallet Bridge is coming down. This is a picture of a newspaper article that was published in the Derry Journal on the day that we were arriving in Derry. I say Derry, some officially it's called Londonderry, but if you look at all the signs along A6 as you approach Londonderry, London is all crossed out in graffiti, and it's just Derry. That's how things are there. And you can't go into Derry without meeting these ladies.
And the wee English lad.
Yes, and the wee English lad. The Derry Girls, very popular Netflix television show. And I saw this, and I was like, oh, the Derry Girls! I gotta get a picture with the Derry Girls. And so, I had to take this selfie. This is a picture of me entering Free Derry. So that was one of the last photographs that day. This picture was taken the day before they had riots earlier this spring in Derry. That sadly led to the death of a journalist by the name of Myra McKee. And those 2 days leading up to our arrival in Derry, there was just a lot of tension there. Feel it in the air. Didn't know that there was going to be a riot or anything like that, but it was just a lot of things that were just not feeling right. Starting, way back in Cloudy and the experience we had there, being yelled at, just stuff like that. And so we spent one night in Derry and then decided, okay, it's just not feeling right. The spirits here were not just being very positive. We did a little tour of the city, and then we took a bus across the border into County Mayo, into the next county, the first county over the line. And we rented the car and we drove down to County Mayo. There was another walk that we had planned, and this was a historic famine trail walk in County Mayo. And so Dan and I went down to County Mayo, and a day later we started this 24-mile famine trail walk. It was in the Dula Valley, and it was dedicated to people who lost their lives trying to reach a relief station for food stamps back in 1847. And there were some requirements where all the people who were trying to receive food assistance had to be at this lodge called Delphi Lodge by 7 a.m. in the morning, otherwise they wouldn't qualify. So people walked throughout the night, this very barren, desolate area, to reach this food station, and only to be turned away once they arrived, not given any food, but just turned away. Well, fortunately, today, Delphi Lodge welcomes all visitors. We were welcomed, we were served tea and scones, and showed, the manager of the lodge came out, and he showed us a memorial that they have for those victims of the 1847 famine, and said we were very lucky to be welcomed so humbly. Along that walk, there was this farm called the Glen Clean Farm, and they were closed. But we walked in, and we asked if we could use the restroom, and the woman heard our accent, wanted to know where we were from and what we were doing. We told her we were walking the famine trail. She says, "Well, how are you going to get back?" And I said, "Oh, we're going to walk back." She says, "Oh, because most people only walk one way and get a ride the other way." And we said, "No, we're going to do the whole trail today, all 24 miles." We had started about 6 o'clock in the morning. I think we finished about 10 o'clock at night. It was a really long walk, but we made a lot of stops. Well, and this was one of our stops. And so her husband came in. He'd been doing a lot of lambing that morning. They had like 2,000 sheep, and lambs were being born all day long. Lambs were being born everywhere you walk. This time of year. And he came in, and he started talking to us, and we explained that Dan was from Utah, and I was from Massachusetts, and he was like, "Really? Massachusetts? Where in Massachusetts?" I said, "I'm from Western Mass." He was like, "Step forward. Specifically, where in Massachusetts?" I said, "Amherst, Northampton, Holyoke." He says, "Oh my goodness," he says, "I went to UMass." I said, "Get out of here, I graduated from UMass." And we just started talking and sharing experience. He played lacrosse at UMass many years ago. And is there now, that's his home, and that's his son there. And he comes back to Boston every once in a while to be involved. And so just a really great person to have met. And there's not another house a mile around. And, here he is from Massachusetts. Great guy, great guy. And this is the Dula Valley that we walked through. And it was just spectacular. Just the light, the way it hit the mountains, the change, and the wild sheep running on the hillsides. It was just really, really beautiful. You can do this as a drive. It's a lovely drive through this area in County Mayo, and I recommend it to anyone who's visiting Ireland, if you're in the County Mayo area, to look up this historic famine trail and visit. It's just spectacular. One of the things that I did before I left was I did an ancestry DNA. And I wanted to find out what my ancestry was. I have the last name Johnson. It's a Scotch-Irish name, right? And so this were the results that came back, and I was quite surprised that I have supposedly 14% Irish, Scottish ancestry. We're 21% England, Wales, and Northwestern Europe. And that's like, wow, that's really, really interesting. That was, and it made me think, well, was there something in my DNA that sort of turned over and says, you must go to Ireland. You must seek out your ancestry. You must learn more about it. And so I was just fascinated that, here in this year of 2019, I was in Ireland, and while I was standing there, this is an email message that came to me while I was there, and this is what I was looking at when this email message came through. This is a replica of a death ship that's located in County Mayo. And as you know, many people who came over during the famine, they called them these death ships because disease was rampant on these ships. A lot of people died. They were quarantined at sea before they arrived in the U.S. or Canada. And it just occurred to me that it was really kind of a stunning moment that two different ancestors in my past came over on death ships. One group from Africa and maybe another group from Ireland. And it was just a breathtaking moment for me. And I want to say thank you to everyone. I took 1,000 pictures of it. It was so many. So distilling this down to 15 pictures was really hard. This is so much fun.
Would you like to answer one or two questions before you sit down? Would you be open to that? And then we'll go straight into our next segment. Is there anybody with any burning questions?
I do, Ken. I'm fascinated by your last remark about the genealogy and the 14%. Did you know any of this before you went? When did you start to have an interest? What triggered an interest in Ireland for you at what age?
It's a very good question. I couldn't pinpoint it exactly. I was 22. It was 1982. And I remember it, it was the spring of 1982. It was right around St. Patrick's Day. I had an article published in the Daily Collegian. It was an editorial opinion called "Laiose Celebrates St. Patrick's Day." And it was an article that made the case about getting legislators and people to support making Martin Luther King's birthday a national holiday. And I remember saying in this editorial piece, I won't support St. Patrick's Day until Martin Luther King's birthday is made a national holiday. Well, it was made a national holiday. It's celebrated St. Patrick's Day since, and it brought me closer. And after that, I just started picking up little pieces of information about Ireland and some of the history and movements of people. There's this little island in the Caribbean called Montserrat, yes, where a lot of Caribbean Africans still celebrate St. Patrick as part of their history. There were slaves during Oliver Cromwell's time period that were brought to this island, and they started families with these slaves on this island, and their tradition of celebrating St. Patrick is still continued to this day. So it's just little tidbits like that over time that I picked up and just kept that interest in Ireland forward.
The Margaret Maher Award.
Yes.
One more question. Liz.
So, when things were getting tense on your march, did you feel that there was anger against you as a black person, or doing the old civil rights thing that they were still mad about?
There was no anger directed to us. They were just these low-lying bad energies that we were just feeling like in this bar, that where people made us feel uncomfortable there, and we decided just to continue going. But there was nothing directed to us, other than that, when we walked in, and someone yelled at us, to where we came from. That was the only kind of negative things that we actually experienced. But otherwise, it was just I think it was just constantly running into these signs. You know, you would arrive in these towns and, you know, there would be red flowers, tulips all over the place. You know, I love red tulips, but it took on a different meaning there in these towns. And there was still just this difference between Unionist and nationalist, and it made you feel it when you walked into these towns. There was this one town where there was a sign that talked about oppressors and, you know, go back, and I have some pictures of it. It's just, it was really intimidating, you know, particularly seeing the Union Jacks and all these things going on. It was very, very intimidating.
I'm partially asking because both sides of my family came over in 1848. They both landed in Philly, as a matter of fact, mom's and dad's side. But I got harassed, you know, so Ireland's important to me. I got harassed when I went over there 15 or more years ago for how I look. You know, it was not, and that was Southern Ireland actually. So I'm just curious, I haven't been back since because I kind of didn't want to go back. After
No, I would recommend everyone visiting Northern Ireland. It's really beautiful. It's an amazing place. People were very nice. We were happy that, you know, we were invited by Sinn Féin into their offices to meet, you know, the MP Foyle there in Derry. So we were really, really embraced by the Catholic community there, and it was very lovely to be invited in. This one gentleman said, "Here, I want to pay for your lunch today." And, you know, along the way, and people with cars and buses would beep us. They got it. You know, I carried this sign on my back, which I left in my car and I'm bringing in during our break. It said, "Sown in the Derry." They fully understand what that meant, and it was just lovely to meet them along the way.
Thank you, Ken. Round of applause. Now we come to our Margaret Maher competition finalists, and not unlike Ken's experience, we would ask the winner. The first prize is a round trip to Ireland. So we'll be asking the winner to come back to us and present on your trip to Ireland once we know who the winner is. The winner was kindly chosen by our Consul General, Laiose Moore, and in no particular order we decided on Robert T. McMaster will go first.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here today. It's an honor to be chosen as a finalist for this award. And my essay is entitled Hannah and Her Children. The sailing vessel R.C. Winthrop was pulled up to the Charlestown Wharf in Boston on a sunny but cold morning in October 1849. 3 gangways had been lowered, and passengers were cautiously making their way down the steep planks toward the pier below. Only a few dozen people had gathered there awaiting the ship's arrival, some merely curious onlookers, others watching hopefully for a familiar face. The Winthrop had set sail from Liverpool nearly 6 weeks earlier. The trip was long and arduous, the Atlantic buffeting the vessel mercilessly day and night. Passengers privileged to have cabins were fortunate, although even for them it was a trying voyage. But the plight of the poor penniless Irish aboard was much worse. They were crammed together in the steerage section deep below decks with little but cold wooden boards to lie upon, thin, moth-eaten blankets to cover them as they slept. Disease was rampant among them: lice, fleas, mice, rats. Vessels such as the Winthrop were known in those days as coffin ships. So common was death among their passengers. Near the end of the line of passengers descending to the pier was a young woman, Hannah McGurk. Her hair wet, dirty, matted against her face, a threadbare shawl drawn around her shoulders. Her hollowed eyes witnessed to sickness, confusion, and fear. She was holding an infant in one arm, leading a second child, a girl barely 2 years old, with the other. Behind her followed two boys, ages 8 and 9. Their eyes too spoke volumes of exhaustion, of confusion, but also of hope and wonder at this new and shimmering land they had at last reached. Back in Onacloy, County Tyrone, the McGurks had barely survived the last 4 years, as all around them the potato famine took its deadly toll of friends, neighbors, and family. Their English landlords appropriated the few edible crops for themselves, leaving their tenants to starve. Their father, Barney, had worked any odd job he could find to feed his family on meager rations. But he was now in jail, having been convicted of stealing a loaf of bread, and sentenced to prison in Tasmania, half a world away. He had been shipped out from Belfast, knowing he might never return to his homeland, never again to see his wife and 3 children. He didn't even know about the 4th, and would never gaze upon her sweet face. He was thousands of miles away on the day she was born. Hannah McGurk and her children were taken in by a family in Watertown, Massachusetts, and for a time provided with a small apartment. She and her oldest son, Bernard, went to work for a well-to-do family, while Cornelius and Margaret stayed at home, caring for little Mary Jane. Hannah's story goes from bad to worse. She was soon institutionalized with apoplexy and lived out her days in an almshouse in Tewkesbury, most of whose inmates were impoverished Irish refugees like herself. Her sons both served in the Union Army during the Civil War, then married and settled down, Bernard in Louisiana, Cornelius in Boston. As to Margaret and Mary Jane, after their mother was institutionalized, they spent several years in the almshouse at Munson, then worked as domestic helpers for a time before marrying. Mary Jane had 5 children with her first husband, 4 sons and a daughter. She was a devoted mother, and her children were bright and resourceful, especially daughter Clara, who was a promising student. Not many girls finished high school in the 1890s, but Clara's aunt Margaret and husband Edward Sherman made it possible for her to enroll at Cambridge Latin High School in 1893. She graduated in 1896, then returned home to her mother and stepfather in Warren. A few years later, she met and married Robert T. McMaster, my namesake. How do I know so much about Hannah and her children? Because Hannah McGurk was my great-great-grandmother. I never met her. She died some 60 years before I was born. But I do remember Clara McMaster, my grandmother, who raised my father and his 3 sisters alone after her husband died in 1920. Clara and Mary Jane now reside in a cemetery in Munson, where I visit them from time to time. Excuse me. Standing over their graves, I think about the hardships they endured, the courage they displayed, and the kindnesses they received from family and friends in America. Unfortunately, I cannot visit Hannah's grave. It's unmarked and lies in a small, abandoned, overgrown burial plot on the grounds of the Tewkesbury State Hospital, behind a locked gate. She deserved better than that. She saved her family from starvation. My dream is to do homage to Hannah and her children, to tour the Irish Immigration Museum in Dublin, to visit the archaeological sites in County Meath, to climb a mountaintop in County Wicklow and look down as if from heaven upon the Emerald Isle. And of course, to walk the streets of Onacloy and gaze upon those fields once barren and blighted, now fertile again, and thank God for the bravery of that family and millions of others in the face of bitter tragedy and adversity. While in Ireland, I will also be reminded of the life they found in America. Of course, it wasn't always easy being Irish in the land of opportunity. There was prejudice, And I have no doubt Hannah and her children, as they walked the gravel streets of Watertown, often pined for the verdant hills of Ireland. And I will give thanks for their sympathy and help that they received from so many Americans who knew very well how it felt to be a stranger in a new land with nothing but memories of their homeland seared in their hearts. Rest in peace, Hannah McGurk. Rest in peace, and thank you.
Very moving, Bob, thank you. Our next competitor and finalist, Margaret Andrews.
Beyond the Blarney Stone. In object lessons, the life of the woman and the poet in our time, Evan Boland elucidates. The expatriate is in search of a country, the exile in search of a self. When I first went to Ireland in my mid-20s, I felt caught somewhere in between those definitions, disaffected with the political environment in the land of my birth. I remained reluctant to make a permanent break. As a woman, resistant to adopting a conventional role, I felt further alienated as a writer, though not forced into exile. Growing up in the same hometown as Emily Dickinson, I admired her self-imposed retreat, her ability to create an inner landscape where she could visit that fairer house than prose she claimed by naming it. Possibility, where she spread her narrow hands to gather paradise. I worked and saved enough money to buy myself the privilege of time to temporarily escape to Ireland. My travels occurred during 2 10-month periods, September through June, 1973 to 74, and 1975 to 76. My overarching aim then was to venture past the limits of being a tourist, to go far beyond kissing the Blarney Stone. I returned to County Cork, but I snubbed superstition's shallow promise. Instead, I perused the prosaic offerings of a small town that sits near one of the areas hardest hit by the famine. Dunmanway is the origin of one of my 3 Irish great-grandmothers. On the 1843 baptismal record of my maternal great-grandmother, Sarah Cummings, Patrick Cummings and Anne Mahoney are listed as her parents. Sarah emigrated to America in 1865. She married Gus Bishop in 1874 and lived the rest of her life in Arlington, Mass. Sarah and Gus had 3 children, Mary, John, and Harriet. Harriet Bishop was my grandmother. I believe that my late mother was named after Mary. Sarah's first cousin, Dennis Mahoney, emigrated from Dunmanway in 1861. He served in the 28th Massachusetts Infantry Regiment during the American Civil War. Dennis's son, born in Chelsea, Mass., was Joseph Christopher O'Mahony. He became a Democratic senator from Wyoming who was instrumental in uncovering the Teapot Dome scandal. My father, Tom, had 2 Irish grandmothers. Genealogical research has unearthed little about them. Mary MacDonald, my father's maternal grandmother, may have emigrated from Limerick, and she is buried in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. The Irish birthplace of Catherine Donahoe, my father's paternal grandmother, is not known. Catherine married my great-grandfather, Frederick Andrews, in 1863 in the north end of Boston. The couple had 10 children, 7 of whom lived. One, born in 1872, was my grandfather, also named Frederick Andrews. I want to imprint the shape of my feet into the ground where Sarah and Dennis survived long enough to risk leaping into the unknown. I will shout their names to honor their durable courage. If I discover where my paternal great-grandmothers came from, I'll do the same for them. I returned to Dublin as well for the first time in over 40 years. I'd hoist a pint in Grogan's to savor the flavor of Guinness drunk close to the source. And I'd step into the snug where I attuned my ears to the nuances in the ebb and flow of fluid conversations. Among the writers I met in that pub was Dermot Healy, much later praised by Seamus Heaney as heir to Patrick Kavanagh. I'd seek out literary readings too, perhaps to hear Eileen Naculinan again, and to hear the tides in voices of women whose words I'd only seen on paper. I browsed through bookstores, older ones like Hodges Figgis and newer books upstairs. I'd saunter through Stephen's Green once more. I'd stroll around the grounds of Trinity College, where I earned a higher diploma in Anglo-Irish literature. David Norris and Brendan Kennelly, foremost among my teachers. I'd enjoy another look at the illuminated Book of Kells and admire again golden artifacts in the National Museum. I might hop on a bus so I could ramble through wider urban spaces in Phoenix Park and the Botanical Gardens. Planxty, the Bothy Band, and the Chieftains first immersed me in traditional music. Wherever I go, I will listen for melodies and harmonies, whistled, piped, and bowed. Perhaps my feet will yield to Bodon's ancient rhythmic urgings. My ears will always hearken to a plaintive air, grasping to glean the grace notes. I've grown comfortable in my self-defined identity, but my cranky knees acknowledge I have more past than future. I can no longer anticipate the luxury of time. Dare I deny the blood tug of wanderlust? I want to wander mindfully in Ireland again, to stay open to possibility, breath by breath, as I did one sunny Sunday, late in February long ago. Climbing a hill alone near Clifton, my sole aim was to follow a greening, winding path to its conclusion. I walked past grazing cows, heat seeping into me way beyond skin deep. Rounding the last turn, I stood stunned by an expanse of scintillating ocean. A dozen dolphins diving and leaping drummed dark tones through glittering pulses, embodying sheer joy. I lost all sense except a sensibility of being merged with all that is. How to define an amazing moment of mystery so brief and so profound? Satori, one whole note seared into my core, a spark of inspiration flying from a fire out of time. I've never been able to willingly suspend my disbelief since then. The brilliant heart of paradise suddenly gathering my soul home.
Beautiful. Thank you, Margaret. And our final finalist, Tony Ryan.
Thank you very much, and of course, like the other contestants, what an honor. This is absolutely stunning. So Ireland, what interests me and why? As a third-generation Irish American, I have to ask myself, what doesn't interest me about Ireland? Raised in the tradition which included Saints Patrick, Brennan, and Bridget, Social and rebellion activists such as Daniel O'Connell, James Larkin, James Connolly, and Constance Demakovitz, and songs by Ruby Murray, Frank Connors, and the Dubliners, my love of Ireland was nurtured at an early age and carried with me for a lifetime. In fact, this interest has really evolved into an identification. As James Joyce so eloquently put, we are what we were. Irish energy from my childhood included mandatory readings, Story of the Irish Race, and The Great Hunger. This not only stimulated my interest in knowing more about the Irish past, but also ignited my quest of learning about its present and future. My interest grew into a passion until I finally had the opportunity and good fortune to take a trip to Éire. This singular experience solidified my deep appreciation of Ireland and helped me recognize its natural beauty, spiritual and historic roots, center of learning, and sense of community. Prior to even touchdown from the aircraft, I looked out the window on the 40 shades of green, excited at the view and eager to set foot on the soil. I immediately found nature abounds in Ireland like no other place I'd been. It's majestic and at other times surreal. Looking out on Slieve League or the cliffs of Moher, I was captivated by their magnificence. Riding in the country produced an unexpected, a rainbow over Inch Beach, a scene from the movie Ryan's Daughter. Traveling through the hills of Donegal or seeing the sunset in Dublin were sights to behold. Truly, you cannot look upon the splendor and glory of this island without recognizing and loving nature. And in loving the expressions of nature, I have to say I became more appreciative of my own existence and my Irish heritage. Traveling through this land of saints and scholars, I was consumed with the sense of spirituality, which has been a personal voyage throughout my life. Whether we are followers of the ancients or modern Christianity, the Irish culture saturates one's soul in appreciation of a higher being and the lives and sacrifices the Irish have endured in search of this goal. It is as if it is rooted in the life and breath of the island. There is an historical devotion and recognition of a greater good, which inspires the Irish, and during the Dark Ages, saved civilization. Witnessing the dolmens and cranes, the monasteries and abbeys, my soul is invigorated and my mind reaches out to an absolute. The depth of this experience transcends an interest into that of a goal. In recognizing how deeply Irishness touches my identity, it's not surprising I've been drawn to contemplate the richness of our heritage and the significance of its impact on my life. When visiting, I feel drawn to the solitude of ancient abbeys and monasteries, the Burren, historical sites, majestic views, and deserted famine houses. Meditating and contemplating on my life and those who went before instilled in me a sense of unity with my Irish past. As a regular meditator of over 49 years, I can say that meditation at Clonmacnoise, Crowpatrick, Dunangus is celestial in silence and reflection. Likewise, reflecting on the significance of Kilmainham Jail, the Derry Wall, and the Rock of Cashel stirs my soul. It is almost redundant to say my interest in Ireland inspires learning. The Brian laws, the oral tradition of storytelling, the hierarchy of poets and druids, Trinity College, the Middle Age centers of learning, all set the stage for a thirst for more knowledge. And Ireland does not disappoint. As we take steps and encounter significant people, places, and things, from a stone circle, a cobblestone sidewalk laden with icons of Irish greats, to the museums and theaters, I find every breath I take exudes inspiration. In Ireland, I feel like a sponge, soaking up what I can and at the same time overflowing. And then there is community. One cannot feel more welcomed in the world than in Ireland. The Irish embrace stranger and neighbor alike. This is evident in its history, its stories, its trad sessions in modern metropolitan cities. The diversity of Ireland inspires the common good and extends 1,000 welcomes. What interests me about Ireland and why? It simply comes down to a sense of identity. Ireland allows me, as well as other visitors, to experience more of who we are. Ireland connects our fundamental being and the natural impulses that foster growth and evolution. To me, this enlivening is not really a conscious effort, but as natural as the warmth of a fire. We needn't try for the experience. We are exposed to it and in turn influenced by it. The end product of being in Ireland is we simply become a better person and more of who we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tony. Tim will now introduce Laiose, and would you like to say a few words? Please, a warm welcome for our Consul General of Boston.
Sam is our hero, is standing up here and doing introductions. I'm not it. But in any case, we want to welcome Laiose coming here today. It's a very special occasion for us. Always wanting to have these awards, but it's always very special to have the Consul from Boston represented. We have a relationship with them through the Immigrant Support Program, which has become very important to us and allows us to do all the advertising for our events and to offer many of the services that we do for all of you. So we're very, very grateful that she's here today, and we are very, very grateful for her to be the person that chose the winner for our award today. So with no further ado, Laiose Moore.
So thanks very much, Tim and Ida and all the organisers. First of all, just thank you so much for inviting me here today to meet all of you and to accept the award. I'm relatively new in town. I started my post in Boston at the start of the summer, and I'm just in the process of reaching out, getting to know everybody, and it's really touching to me personally to see how many people in all parts of the state, in all parts of New England, have such a deep connection with Ireland and work so hard and do such amazing things to make sure that those connections, we remember our past, but also that that those connections are continued in a very real way and into the present. And before I start talking about the essay competition this year, I just wanted to say, your talk about your experience traveling to Ireland, I mean, if anything was to speak to the value of this award and the prize of getting people to travel to Ireland, then that is it, because, I mean, I really got the impression from your talk that it was something that kind of touched you in a really profound way, and it was a really extraordinary talk, and I really liked particularly the way you talked about your previous walks in Puerto Rico and in Montgomery and Alabama, and you drew those connections back to Ireland, because, you know, we talk about Ireland, it's a national story, but it's also an international story, and it's just really, really impressive that you were able to do that. I'm not going to announce the winner until I get given some kind of signal to do, but before I do, I just want to say I'm really glad that you invited me here to present the award and to choose the winner, but you gave me a really tough job. I mean, you know, really, I just wanted to pay tribute to all of the runners-up. Each of, you know, a very different kind of way. Each of you was able to bring out with your writing how passionately you feel about Ireland and how much it means to you, and it's just
I just want to congratulate all of you. It was a really, really tough job to be able to pick out one person, so, yeah.
Lisa, will we ask them to stand up beside you,
Okay,
please? The
perfect.
3 finalists, if you would, please.
And if you would, take a, can I see your signature? Can I fill it off?
Sure, no problem. Is this it here? Do you want to have the password? I'll send these out to you anyway, if you want to.
Do you just want me to read out the?
It's just.
So, congratulations to you all. I was just so impressed by the standard of the work and by the passion that you all evidently put for Ireland. It's a great privilege. So, without further ado, the winner of the 2019 Margaret Maher Award is Margaret Maher.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you so much. And I hold you there, Leisha, a little gift for you. And Ken, would you come up here and we're getting all out of this? There we go. Last year's and this year's. Thank you so much, everybody. One more, Margie. Yahoo!
Thanks to you, Ida, and to Tim, and to everybody else for organising this, and to all of you for coming. It's really wonderful.
We're now to our tea and tunes, where Annie is in charge of tea and scones. Please, maybe have any questions you have for our finalists. Our dancers from UMass will dance. We have Anne and Gary playing with us today as subs for the musicians. And please, we'll be bringing out the tea and scones momentarily. Thank you.